pleasure to be here this evening to introduce our first speaker, Julian Buchanan. Julian is an Associate Professor of Criminology at Victoria University of Wellington. He specialises in drug use and misuse, social inequality and discrimination. He's widely published in these areas with around 40 contributions to journals and book chapters. This evening, Julian will be talking about what policies are making it more hard for people who are struggling with drug use. Thank you, Julian.
If you could hold your questions to the end, the way this is going to work is that each speaker will speak for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer panel session at the end. So if you can keep your questions in mind for that time. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you, and lovely to see some familiar faces. So that's really nice to see some students and some neighbours as well even come along. So, well, I just discovered their neighbours, but okay, I'm going to be looking at the issue of drugs, and in terms of drug policy creating more harm than good at times. I'm going to whiz through very quickly. I've only got about 20 minutes. There'll be lots of evidence for you, so you can have a copy of the presentation. You can use it and reuse it after the event. I brought some cards as well, so if there's information you want more on, I'd be delighted to email you lots and lots of evidence. Because what I'm trying to do here is move us towards a more evidence-based approach, rooted in harm reduction and promoting human rights. So let's move through here. So our drug policy in the 21st century is really very much rooted in law enforcement. The police, the customs and excise and the armed forces. And it originates in the 1950s, 1960s. And what we've got really is a drug war. And our drug war privileges and promotes societal use of particular drugs while policing and severely punishing societal use of other drugs. So we can enjoy our tea and our coffee, we can enjoy our alcohol and our caffeine, but we can't enjoy other substances. So it's a social experiment in my mind. It's a social experiment that's gone badly wrong and damaged and hurt the most vulnerable of our society. It tends not to damage and hurt the people in this room, generally speaking. I'm talking about drug policy here. So what drug policy has done, rooted in prohibition, has caused harmful patterns of illicit drug use and caused harmful drug policy damage from illicit drugs, and I'll outline some of the harms later. The cultural accommodation and the promotion of legal drugs as expressions of celebration, pleasure, leisure and socialisation, at almost every occasion we privilege certain drugs in this way. We're very much encouraged to celebrate and enjoy our drug ethanol, our favourite drug. Every event you can think of, it's time to enjoy some ethanol. And what sense does that make? No. And even this little mini that we see, created like a rocket, illustrating the sale of a stimulant drug, a drug that's no different really in many respects to cocaine, to amphetamine or methamphetamine. It's a stimulant drug. But our war on particular drugs was established really by President Nixon in '72 when he declared war on illegal drugs. An illegal drug, by the way, is what's listed in the UN Convention. There isn't any scientific or pharmacological basis for these substances being known as drugs. They're just those things on the list. And so the other substances which we entertain, we don't tend to call those drugs. But you can see there the very rapid increase in incarceration in the US once the war on drugs was declared. And you can see here in New Zealand, you can see that 1 in 20 recorded crimes is for a drug-defined offence, and roughly 1 in 10 people incarcerated are for a drug-defined offence. Drug-defined being possession, supply, cultivation. We're not talking about drug-related offences here. So if that's a bit of a nonsense and it's really very archaic and there's no real science to support this separation of different substances that we've accommodated and rejected, and it's been in existence really in some debate that stretches back to 1950, who's arguing for a rethink? Well, there's a lot of surprising people really arguing for a rethink. This is Dame Runciman doing a piece of research investigation for the Police Commission in the UK, and that was back in 1999. And she said, or her committee said, that the present classification system needs to be reviewed. It needs to actually incorporate science and sociological and medical thinking. That was 15 years ago, and the UK is still waiting. The UK system, very, very similar to the New Zealand system and ABC classification system. And they said that the custodial penalties should be removed from the B and C, recognising that law enforcement has very little impact upon levels of drug use, and saying we need to decouple law enforcement. This other document, another report by the Science and Technology Committee called Drug Classification in the ABC, making a hash of it. Nicely named, really, isn't it? That says that the current classification system is not fit for purpose. So this is again is almost like 10 years ago, and they're saying what we've got is not fit for purpose. It needs to be based on science, and we need to decouple penalties for possession and trafficking. So there isn't any merit in having penalties for trafficking and possession. So they found no evidence for deterrent effect by having punishments for drugs. And then just more recently, there was another piece of work done by the Home Office, International Comparators, where they visited different countries, and they found that the countries and the levels of use wasn't easily connectable with law enforcement, that basically that the law enforcement measures and the impact on use, that the changes in use were much more nuanced and were influenced by other factors, not particularly by law enforcement. And here in New Zealand, now 4 years ago and gathering dust on the shelf, the Law Commission report said that we need a more flexible approach here towards small-scale dealing and personal possession use, particularly when these things are linked to addiction and people have got difficulties and problems. The Law Commission concluded that cautioning scheme would be more appropriate response for personal possession, and we want to divert users away from the criminal justice system at an early stage. So you can see the same messages coming out from different countries and different reports. Removing minor drug offences from the criminal justice system, giving people better opportunities to get access to treatment. So that was the Law Commission report. And this group here of obviously clearly young lefties, very hippie, and I'll soon be probably joining this crew, I suppose. But this group here formed the Global Commission on Drug Policy. A lot of ex-presidents, Richard Branson you might have spotted, and they've done lots, they've done I think 3 reports now, and they often speak, and they're concluding that the war on drugs, as they've called it, prohibition and tough law enforcement has failed with devastating consequences, and that we need fundamental reforms in national and global policies, and they're urgently needed. So what's happening is that the tough war on drugs approach is not having the impact that some people might want it to have. If it's meant to be reducing drug use, it's not reducing drug use. This is 2014 and the UNODC, and they're saying that in the world, around 3 to 7% of the population have used illicit drugs. I did a survey, I do it quite often with my students, and often find that the figures of drug use currently are well in excess of 60%, and these are educated, supposedly intelligent people or whatever, who they're using lots of illicit drugs and taking the risk of criminal convictions. So we know that prohibition is not deterring people from using illicit drugs, and neither is it reducing supply, but that's another lecture. So let's move towards a more scientific approach. Well, this is a piece, this is the best that we've got at the moment. It's not definitive, but it's very informed, and it's led by Professor David Nutt, and it was published in The Lancet in 2010. And what you see here is basically a league table of harms. And this is the harms posed by drugs to the individual and to wider society. And this was a piece of research that Professor Nutt arranged with drug experts and said, you know, in relation to a whole range of different categories of harm, rating them 0 to 5, what would come out of the top. And lo and behold, the most harmful substance, the most harmful drug is alcohol. And interestingly, some drugs down here for which you can get incarcerated for life if you're found to have supplied them to somebody are Class A drugs. So it illustrates that our ABC classification system, as has been said in all the previous reports I've referred to, is not fit for purpose. So what we're saying is that the tough enforcement has little impact on use, it has little impact on supply, and actually it's very inaccurate in terms of what we've come to deem to be drugs and what we've come to consider to be dangerous or risky compared to the reality when we look at science. And tobacco is quite high up there too. So, well, around about 60% of Kiwis use illicit drugs. Most people, like the people here, will not be criminalised for using drugs. And here's another bunch of people who just happen to use lots, you know, a number of illicit drugs, and they didn't get criminalised. I don't know if there's any you can't spot there, but they've all used illicit drugs. The drugs are all listed there, and all the last 3 US presidents have all used illicit drugs. They haven't turned out as addicts because using illicit drugs, like all the students and people in this room who use illicit drugs, they don't turn up and end up as addicts. A small proportion of people will end up with a drug problem, whichever drug you talk about, but it's only a small proportion. So these people are the users, but they will not be stopped by the police. The people who will be stopped by the police through the drug laws will disproportionately be the poor, the indigenous people, the ethnic minorities, and vulnerable groups. So when we talk about drug laws, we're really talking about a group of socially excluded people who are forever being handled by the police. And it's easy to pick people up for drug possession. And when they struggle, if some of these people develop a drug problem and have difficulties, even when they move up the steps to try and recover and try and gain a place in society, there's a wall of exclusion that gives them the prohibition and the blame that goes with being... Because the war on drugs, or the drug war, is really a drug war on particular users. And it's actually not the people you saw in that picture before in colour, the famous people. They're not really subject to the drug war. The drug war is really the poor people and the indigenous people and the people of ethnic minorities. And it's also people who are vulnerable with damaged lives. And with damaged lives, it becomes very difficult to get back into society. So after some research I did over in the UK, I said, when considering treatment and rehabilitation, we've got to recognise that many people have difficulties with drugs and develop long-standing problems. They've got limited options in life available to them. They've got limited personal resources. They lack the confidence, the social skills, the social capital. And without this limited, experience, this lack of positive life experience to lean upon or to return to because it never existed for them, this client group really need integration, not reintegration. They really need habilitation, not rehabilitation, because a lot of the people who are in quite a mess with drugs and can't get out of that state, they're not given chances by society because of the drug war. But equally, they've often never had much of a chance anyway. So it becomes very difficult for them to have a life which isn't centred around drugs. And then the people who get stopped, as I was saying before, black people in the UK are 6 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs than white people, even though they don't use drugs more frequently. And then once stopped by the police, they're much more likely to be charged. 78% of black people are charged compared to 44% compared to 44% of white people. And in the US, though, you've got the figures there. While black and white have got very similar levels of drug use, what you see there is from 1980 right through to 2007, and this is per 100,000. So what you can see is that if you're black, you're much more likely to be stopped and arrested by the police for a drug offence than if you are white. So when we talk about drug laws, we're talking about disproportionate enforcement. So it won't affect them. We've got the point now in the US where 1 in 3 black males will be incarcerated, and a lot of those will be for drugs. It's a dreadful state of affairs. And here in New Zealand, we have an overrepresentation of Māori in the prison population, which we're well aware of. 51% of the prison population, about 14% of the population generally. But when it comes to cannabis, they're much more likely to be charged for offences. So while only 5% or less than 5% will be done and charged for cannabis, if you're Māori, the chances are 34% of being charged for cannabis. So you can see similar patterns there emerging. So what can we learn from international? I'm going to have to whiz through very quickly. I'll just whiz through. The UK, basically the UK, I'm going to quickly skip that, you can always read it another day, but I'll let you see the most important thing, is that the UK downgraded cannabis and had a big thing about it. It was announced in 2001 up there. All the popular press said the government are going to decriminalise cannabis. All the young people are going to be off their heads on cannabis. It's going to be incredibly dangerous. It's ridiculous what the government are doing. But the government then went ahead and did it about 3 years later. They needed time because they wanted to increase supply of cannabis to 14 years when it became a Class C drug. So they wanted to get tough on cannabis supply. So they downgraded it then, they announced it then, they downgraded it then, and then they reclassified it back again under public pressure, back up to a Class B drug. So they downgraded the offences, they made it almost like decriminalised, but this here in the blue line is the young people's past year use of cannabis. So when it was downgraded and word was going on the street that you can always get away with doing cannabis, young people did not increase their use of cannabis. Actually, it was the opposite. It went down. So we can learn from that. Just quickly on 2 countries here, Amsterdam, or 2 cities, Amsterdam and San Francisco. San Francisco being at that time really tough against cannabis, and nobody can have it. We're going to be tough on supply, we'll be tough on possession. In San Francisco, I should say. And in Amsterdam, really liberal. You can get it in a cafe, it's legal, it's easily available, and it's been like that since 1976 in Amsterdam. So Amsterdam have legalised cannabis effectively. They certainly decriminalised it and you get it. But what this research by Raderman discovered is that when you look at users of cannabis in these 2 cities, one with very tough law enforcement and prohibition, and one very liberal, there was no difference in patterns of use. So the age of onset was actually older in Amsterdam, slightly. But certainly there was no difference. So what we found is the age of onset, the age of first regular use, and the start of maximum use was the same in both cities. And actually you can see in Amsterdam and Holland generally is this is a graph of European countries, and this at the bottom here is Holland, and this is problematic drug use, the use that we should be most concerned about, and they have the lowest figures. So the notion that by taking cannabis is going to lead to them being all addicts or whatever, actually they've got the lowest percentage of problematic drug users with problems. Quickly whiz through. So that's learning from, and then we can learn from Portugal, who decriminalised every possession of every drug you can think of, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, you name it, all decriminalised in Portugal since 2001. And Portugal, there's an article there I can send you. But what you see here is that their figures of any illicit drug use, cannabis use, and ecstasy actually went down. And this is other countries. So you've got Italy there and European countries. So these countries have got tough law enforcement. This one, drug possession, is decriminalised, and there's no figures to suggest that things are becoming problematic. Right, I'm going to have to whiz through. I think I've probably got 5 minutes left if I'm lucky. I get dragged off in a minute. Decriminalisation doesn't inevitably lead to drug use. That's what we can learn. So this is the lessons from Portugal, is that there were some small increases in illicit drug use, mainly from older people, not the younger people. There were drops in illicit drug use. Problematic drug use, which is the most thing we should worry about. So I don't worry about you guys using alcohol, but I do worry if you've got a problem with alcohol. So I don't worry about drug use, I worry about problematic drug use. I do worry about illegal drug use because it's illegal and it causes more harm, but that's another story, that's prohibition. We can learn from Switzerland, where Switzerland realised that they shouldn't just leave people, and they realised if they give people clean heroin on prescription, that they actually make great progress, and they give people clean heroin and clean needles to inject, and people make great progress. And the Swiss people understood the progress it was making, and eventually they had a referendum across the Swiss country, and the general population of Switzerland voted 68% in rolling this out in the entire country, because they could see this made sense. They could see crime was reduced, they could see HIV and HEP was being reduced, and the people were getting their lives together because they weren't needing to run around like headless chickens trying to get some cash for heroin or whatever. So there's some positive benefits there from Switzerland been shown. The Swiss, interestingly, based it on the British model, which I was involved in the 1980s. So prohibition and punishment makes drug use more harmful. This was a lady, Anne-Marie Coburn, who lost her daughter through an incredibly pure ecstasy, and is saying that the war on drugs has killed my daughter. And this want to quickly point out 7 points that are made worse by prohibition. That people have no idea the strength of what they're taking, so they can overdose. They've got no idea what's mixed in the drug, could be toxic. They're driven underground, so they have to go sometimes to some dodgy places, sometimes having to mix. Everybody they mix with is officially a criminal. They risk having to go on to drug rehabs or have to do community sentences. They have to use in secret, and using in secret you're more vulnerable, you're more isolated, you could be in a dodgy place. And if you want help, you're less likely to get help because it's a criminal offence. So you're less likely to seek the help that you need. So there are 7 problems caused not by illicit drugs, but caused by prohibition. And one of the things we can do if the strength is too high and people don't know what they're using because it's illegal, is we can give people naloxone. And this person saying, well, when's the best time to roll out an overdose program? Well, the answer is many, many years ago. The second best answer is today, because there's an antidote available that will reverse an opiate overdose immediately, as long as it's not too far gone and the person's not. So we have 1 in 10 people dying here in New Zealand. So one person dying every 10 days through an opioid overdose. And if we allow naloxone to be given, then we will save lives. So it's hard to understand why we don't do that. Right, so very quickly, prohibition has little or no impact on drug demand or use. It's got little or no impact on drug supply. Prohibition makes drug use more harmful and more dangerous. Prohibition limits our knowledge of production, distribution, sale and use. Prohibition makes drug markets more violent, and there's evidence for that. Prohibition is racially biased and in terms of its arrests and punishments. Prohibition causes enormous costs to the criminal justice system, but it also fuels a very lucrative underground business. Decriminalisation gives criminal justice agencies more time and money. It reduces the level of problematic drug use. It doesn't result in any significant increase in illicit drug use. It increases rehab and reintegration. It reduces social and health-related issues. It might reduce the volume of ethnically biased apprehensions, arrests. And importantly, it avoids the lifelong harm, the very damaging harm of a drug conviction. So 4 priorities to finish. To reduce harm to people who are struggling with drug problems, decriminalise all possession and remove the threat and the damage and the harm of drug convictions, and the sense in which we wage war on these people for doing this behaviour. Distribute naloxone to families, friends. Adopt Good Samaritan laws. So if I'm injecting or helping somebody to inject and they die of an overdose from what they've bought or whatever, I don't get done for manslaughter, because that's the way it is at the minute. In other countries, they've got Good Samaritan laws, so that if I ring up for an overdose to help somebody, then I won't be done for manslaughter. It seems crazy, because if somebody's overdosing and you know you're going to get done for manslaughter, you'll leave it to the last minute. And provide quick, easy access to substitute drugs, like they do in Switzerland. But I would suggest that we need to give not just oral drugs. If somebody's an injector, we need to give them injectable drugs. And there we have it. Thank you.